The crystal chandelier above table 12 had been flickering for 3 minutes before anyone noticed. Maya Reeves saw it first, the way the light stuttered against the white tablecloth like a dying heartbeat, casting shadows that danced across the face of the man who'd ordered the ribeye medium rare and hadn't touched it. She'd been a waitress at the Sterling Room for 4 years, long enough to read the subtle signs that separated a satisfied diner from someone merely going through the motions. This man, with his charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent and his silver watch that caught the light with every slight movement of his wrist, was neither. He was dying. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you're enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya didn't know this with certainty yet, but her body knew before her mind could catch up. Her EMT training from 3 years ago, back when she thought she could afford to finish the certification, back before her mother's cancer treatments had drained every dollar she'd saved, had created instincts that lived deeper than conscious thought. She watched him from across the dining room, her tray balanced on her hip, as he lifted his water glass with a hand that trembled just slightly. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Most people weren't trained to see the way his jaw clenched, the way his free hand moved almost imperceptibly to his chest, the way his breathing had become shallow and controlled. The Sterling Room occupied the 52nd floor of the Apex Tower in downtown Manhattan, a place where reservations were booked to 6 months in advance, and the dress code was enforced with the kind of polite but unyielding firmness that kept out anyone who didn't belong. Maya had never belonged here, not really. She belonged to the world below, to the subway delays and the overdue electricity bills, to the smell of her mother's jasmine tea in their cramped Brooklyn apartment and the sound of sirens at 3 in the morning. But she'd learned to move through this space with a grace that made her invisible, the way all good servers learn to disappear into the elegant machinery of fine dining. Table 7 needs their wine, Marcus, the sommelier, whispered as he passed her, his voice carrying the slight accent of his native Marseille. He was gay, 47, and had worked at the Sterling Room longer than anyone except Chef Laurent. He'd taken Maya under his wing her first week, taught her which forks went where, how to describe a wine she'd never tasted, how to smile at men who looked at her like she was part of the menu. The Chateau Margaux, 2010, they've been waiting. Maya nodded but didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on table 12, on the man whose name she knew from the reservation list was Alexander Harrington. She knew other things too, because everyone at the Sterling Room knew about Alexander Harrington. He was 49 years old. He owned Harrington Capital, a private equity firm that had made headlines last year for acquiring and dismantling a century-old textile company in North Carolina, putting 800 people out of work. He'd been featured in Forbes, in the Wall Street Journal, in all the magazines that showed up in the break room and made Maya feel like she was looking through a window into a world that would never want her inside it. He'd been coming to the Sterling Room every Thursday for 6 months, always alone, always ordering the same thing: ribeye medium rare, Caesar salad, no appetizer, sparkling water with lime. He never made small talk. He never looked at his phone. He sat in the corner booth that overlooked the city lights and stared at nothing, eating mechanically, paying in cash, leaving exactly 15%. Not generous, not cheap, precise. Tonight, something was different. Maya moved toward his table, abandoning her tray on the service station. She felt, rather than saw, the shift in the room's energy, the way the other servers' eyes followed her, questioning. Protocol dictated she finish serving table 7 first, but protocol hadn't prepared her for the way Alexander Harrington's face had gone gray, the way sweat had begun to bead along his hairline despite the perfectly climate-controlled temperature of the dining room. "Sir?" Her voice was soft, professional, but carried an edge of urgency that made his eyes snap to hers. They were dark brown, almost black in the dim lighting, and for a moment she saw something in them that looked like recognition, though they'd never properly spoken beyond the exchange of orders and thank yous. "Are you feeling all right?" He opened his mouth to answer, and that's when she knew for certain. The slight grimace that crossed his face, the way his right hand gripped the edge of the table, the barely perceptible catch in his breath, these weren't the signs of indigestion or fatigue. This was acute coronary syndrome, possibly a full myocardial infarction, a heart attack. "I'm fine," he said, and his voice was steady, controlled, the voice of a man who'd spent a lifetime commanding rooms and making decisions worth millions. "Just need a moment." "No, sir, you don't." Maya's training took over completely now, pushing past the fear of overstepping, past the awareness that she was a waitress contradicting a billionaire in a room full of New York's elite. "I need you to stay very still. Don't move. I'm calling for help." She pulled her phone from her apron pocket, but before she could dial, his hand shot out and caught her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong for someone in cardiac distress, desperate in a way that made her heart clench. "Please," he said, and now his voice cracked just slightly, revealing something underneath the control. "No ambulance, no scene. I just need—" "You need emergency medical care," Maya interrupted, gently but firmly removing her wrist from his grasp. "Right now. What you're experiencing are classic symptoms of a heart attack. Every second counts." Around them, the dining room continued its elegant ballet. Servers glided between tables with their trays held high. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Conversations hummed at a volume that suggested importance without urgency. No one else had noticed yet that something was wrong, because the Sterling room was designed to prevent such noticing, to maintain an atmosphere where nothing unpleasant could intrude on the carefully curated experience of wealth and taste. But Maya had grown up in a world where unpleasant things intruded all the time, where her mother had collapsed in the bathroom one Tuesday morning, and Maya had been the one to find her, to call 911, to ride in the ambulance while holding her mother's hand and watching the paramedics work with practiced efficiency. She knew what it looked like when someone tried to pretend they were fine while their body betrayed them. She knew the cost of waiting too long. "I'm going to help you," she said, already pulling out her phone again, already calculating the fastest route for paramedics to reach the 52nd floor. "But you need to let me." Alexander Harrington looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. The control slipped just enough to reveal the fear underneath, the terrible human fear of dying alone in a crowded room while pretending everything was fine. He nodded, barely, and slumped back against the booth. Maya dialed 911 with hands that were steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She'd done this before, in simulations, in her EMT training that she'd never finished. She'd never done it in the middle of a five-star restaurant while wearing a server's uniform and feeling the weight of dozens of eyes beginning to turn her way. "Yes, I need an ambulance at the Apex Tower, 52nd floor, the Sterling Room restaurant. Male, approximately 50 years old, showing signs of myocardial infarction. He's conscious and alert, but experiencing chest discomfort, diaphoresis, and difficulty breathing." The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, asking questions Maya had been trained to answer. How long had the symptoms been present? Was he on any medications? Did he have a history of heart disease? Maya directed the questions to Alexander, who answered in short, clipped sentences that grew increasingly labored. Yes, high blood pressure. Yes, medication. No, no previous episodes. His father had died of a heart attack at 52. "I need you to sit still and try to stay calm," Maya told him, after relaying the information. "Help is coming. I'm going to get you an aspirin. Do you have any allergies to aspirin?" He shook his head, and Maya turned to Marcus, who had appeared at her elbow with wide eyes. "Get me an aspirin from the first aid kit, now, and tell Chef Laurent to clear the service entrance. Paramedics are coming up." Marcus disappeared without question, and Maya pulled a chair over to sit across from Alexander Harrington. She reached across the table and took his wrist, feeling for his pulse. It was rapid, thready, irregular, not good. She kept her face neutral, kept her voice calm. "I'm Maya," she said, because suddenly it seemed important that he know her name, that this not be completely anonymous. "I'm going to stay with you until the paramedics get here, okay? You're not alone." "Maya," he repeated, and even through the pain she could hear him testing the name, making it real. How did you know?" "I was training to be a paramedic," she said, maintaining pressure on his wrist, counting the beats. "Before. I didn't finish, but I learned enough to recognize the signs. You're experiencing a cardiac event, Mr. Harrington. It's serious, but you called for help in time. That's the most important thing." "Alexander," he said. "If you're going to save my life, you should call me Alexander." Despite everything, Maya felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Okay, Alexander. I'm going to need you to focus on taking slow, steady breaths. Don't talk unless you have to answer a question. Conserve your energy." Marcus returned with the aspirin and a glass of water. Maya crushed the tablet between her fingers, faster absorption, and held it to Alexander's lips. "Chew this," she instructed. "Don't swallow it whole." He obeyed, grimacing at the bitter taste, and Maya could see other servers gathering at the edges of her peripheral vision, could feel the shift in the room as diners began to notice that something was wrong. She heard the maître d', Bernard, approaching with his carefully modulated voice of concern, ready to manage the situation with the same efficiency he brought to seating arrangements and wine pairings. "Maya, what's—" "Heart attack," she said, without looking up. Her attention fixed on Alexander, on the way his breathing had become more labored, on the way his skin had taken on a grayish pallor that terrified her, even though her voice remained steady. "Ambulance is on the way. I need everyone to give us space and make sure the paramedics can get through quickly." Bernard didn't question her authority, which surprised her. Later she would realize it was because in that moment she hadn't been asking, she had been commanding, with the kind of certainty that made people listen regardless of hierarchy. He moved away, and she heard him directing the other staff, maintaining the calm that was so essential to the Sterling Room's reputation, even as everything threatened to spiral into chaos.
"Tell me about your father," Maya said suddenly, because she needed to keep Alexander conscious, engaged, present. "You said he died of a heart attack?" Alexander's eyes focused on her with effort. 52, he whispered, in his office. No warning. "That must have been terrifying," Maya said, and she meant it. Could imagine the particular fear of knowing your parent died alone, that no one had been there to hold their hand or tell them help was coming. "But you have something he didn't. You have warning. You have time. You have someone here who knows what to look for." "Lucky," he managed, and there might have been irony in the word or gratitude, she couldn't tell. "Yeah," Maya agreed. "Lucky." She felt his pulse flutter under her fingers, felt the irregular rhythm that meant his heart was struggling, and she made calculations in her head about how long the paramedics would take, about what she would do if he went into full cardiac arrest before they arrived. She'd learned CPR, had practiced on dummies in her training courses, but she'd never had to use it on a real person. The thought terrified her, but she pushed the fear down deep, where it couldn't interfere with what needed to be done. "Why didn't you finish?" Alexander asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "The training." Maya hesitated, surprised by the question, by his persistence in trying to make conversation even as his body betrayed him. But she understood it too, the need to stay connected, to remain human and present instead of disappearing into pain and fear. "Money," she said simply. "My mom got sick. Cancer. The treatments—" She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't need to. Alexander's eyes held understanding, and something else too, something that looked almost like shame. She wondered if he was thinking about the 800 textile workers in North Carolina, about the kinds of calculations that treated human need as acceptable collateral damage in the pursuit of profit. But maybe that was unfair. Maybe she was projecting her own anger onto a dying man who didn't deserve it, regardless of what he'd done in boardrooms and corporate takeovers. The sound of sirens reached them, distant but approaching, and Maya felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. "Hear that?" she said. "They're coming. You're going to be okay." But even as she said it, she saw Alexander's face contort with a fresh wave of pain, saw his hand clench against his chest, and she knew they were running out of time. His pulse under her fingers became more erratic, and she made a split-second decision based on instinct and training that felt like it came from somewhere outside herself. "Alexander, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, leaning forward so her face was close to his, so he had no choice but to focus on her eyes, on the steadiness she was forcing into her voice. "Your heart is under extreme stress right now, and I need you to do exactly what I say. I'm going to help you lie down on the floor. It'll be easier for your heart to pump blood. Do you understand?" He nodded, and with Marcus's help, they eased him out of the booth and onto the carpeted floor of the Sterling Room. Maya grabbed tablecloths from nearby tables, folding them under his head, elevating his legs slightly. She kept one hand on his wrist, monitoring his pulse, kept her eyes on his face, watching for any sign that he was losing consciousness. "Stay with me," she said firmly. "Keep your eyes open. Keep breathing. Think about something good, something you want to do tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he whispered, and his eyes found hers with something desperate in them. I haven't thought about tomorrow in years." The admission struck Maya with unexpected force, the recognition that wealth and power couldn't protect you from the fundamental loneliness of having forgotten how to want anything beyond survival and success. But before she could respond, the paramedics burst through the dining room entrance, their equipment clattering, their presence transforming the elegant space into something immediate and medical and real. Maya stood back, but stayed close, answering their rapid-fire questions with the information she had gathered. She watched them work with professional efficiency, IV line inserted, EKG leads attached, oxygen mask secured, medications administered. She watched Alexander's face as they loaded him onto the stretcher, watched the fear in his eyes as they wheeled him toward the service elevator. And just before he disappeared, his hand reached out and caught hers one more time. "Thank you," he said through the oxygen mask, the words muffled but clear. "Maya, thank you." Then he was gone, and Maya stood in the middle of the Sterling room, surrounded by disrupted tables and staring diners and the residual chaos of the emergency that had just unfolded. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving her hollow and exhausted. Bernard approached him, his expression unreadable, and for a moment she thought he might fire her for causing a scene, for abandoning her tables, for turning the restaurant's elegant evening into a medical drama. Instead, he touched her shoulder gently. "You did well. Very well. Take a break in the back. I'll handle your section."
Maya nodded, unable to trust her voice, and made her way through the kitchen to the employee break room. She sat on the worn couch where the staff ate their meals and stared at her hands, at the fingers that had held a dying man's pulse, and felt his heart struggling beneath the skin. She thought about his question, why hadn't she finished her training, and realized she didn't have a good answer beyond the obvious one. She'd given up because it had seemed impossible, because the weight of her mother's illness and the debt and the sheer grinding exhaustion of trying to keep everything together had made her dreams feel like luxuries she couldn't afford. But tonight, for those 15 minutes between recognizing Alexander Harrington's symptoms and watching the paramedics wheel him away, she'd remembered why she'd wanted to be a paramedic in the first place. She'd remembered the profound privilege of being the person who showed up when everything was falling apart, who held someone's hand and said, "You're not alone," and meant it with every fiber of her being. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Marcus. "He's going to be okay. They stabilized him. You saved his life." Maya read the message 3 times, let the words sink in, felt something shift in her chest that she couldn't quite name. She'd saved a life tonight. Alexander Harrington's life. A man who'd destroyed livelihoods and accumulated wealth beyond imagination and eaten alone at table 12 every Thursday for 6 months like he was serving a sentence. A complicated man. A human man. She didn't know yet that this night would change everything, that Alexander Harrington would remember the waitress who'd seen him dying when no one else had noticed, that gratitude would evolve into something neither of them expected. She didn't know that the chandelier above table 12 would stop flickering after tonight, replaced by management as a reminder that even the smallest malfunction could be a warning sign, that nothing could be ignored. All she knew, sitting in that break room with her hands still shaking and Marcus's text glowing on her phone screen, was that she'd done something that mattered, something real. And for the first time in 3 years, she wondered if maybe it wasn't too late to finish what she'd started. Maya's alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., the same time it had gone off every morning for the past 4 years. She reached across her narrow bed to silence her phone, careful not to disturb the precarious stack of medical textbooks on her nightstand, relics from her incomplete EMT training that she couldn't bring herself to sell or throw away. The apartment was quiet, except for the distant rumble of garbage trucks and the muffled argument happening in 4B, where the Johnsons fought with the regularity of a church bell marking the hours. Her mother was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her jasmine tea and the morning crossword, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Elena Reeves had been beautiful once, before the cancer had taken her hair and carved hollows into her cheeks. Now, 3 years into remission, she was beautiful again in a different way, fragile and fierce simultaneously, like paper that had been burned at the edges but refused to disintegrate. "You came home late," Elena said without looking up from her puzzle, her accent carrying the soft rhythms of her native Philippines. "Past midnight." "Busy night," Maya replied, filling the kettle for her own tea.
She didn't mention Alexander Harrington, didn't mention the way her hands had trembled for hours after the ambulance left, and didn't mention that she'd lain awake until 3 a.m. replaying every moment and wondering if she'd missed something, if there was more she could have done. Her mother worried enough without adding to the burden. "You'll work too hard," Elena said, still not looking up. "Etacross, 7 letters, begins with R." Maya looked over her mother's shoulder at the puzzle. The word that fit was caregiver, but she found herself thinking instead of other words. Champion, crusader, or more accurately for her own situation, could have been. She showered quickly in the bathroom with the perpetually dripping faucet that the landlord refused to fix. Dressed in her work clothes, black slacks, white button-down shirt, comfortable shoes that looked professional but could withstand 10 hours of standing. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw what everyone else saw. A 26-year-old woman, reasonably pretty, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that were too serious for her age. She looked like exactly what she was, someone who'd learned to be invisible, to serve without being seen, to make other people comfortable while her own discomfort went unnoticed. But last night, for those 15 minutes with Alexander Harrington, she'd been visible. She'd been necessary. The memory of it sang in her blood like a half-remembered song. The subway to Manhattan was crowded with the early morning rush, bodies pressed together in the kind of forced intimacy that New Yorkers had mastered ignoring. Maya stood near the doors, swaying with the rhythm of the train, and thought about the text she'd received at 2:14 a.m. from an unknown number. "This is Alexander Harrington. Marcus gave me your number. I wanted to thank you personally. I'm at Mount Sinai. They say I'm going to be fine because of you. I'd like to see you when you have time." She hadn't responded yet, hadn't known what to say. The gulf between their worlds was so vast that even gratitude felt like it came from across an unbridgeable distance. What did a billionaire owe a waitress for saving his life? What could he possibly give her that would matter beyond the immediate emergency? And more disturbingly, what did she want from him? The Sterling room didn't open for lunch service, so Maya's shift started at 4 p.m. with setup and staff meal. She arrived early, as she always did, and found Marcus in the wine cellar taking inventory. He looked up when she entered, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "Our hero returns," he said, setting down his clipboard. "Have you seen the news?" "What news?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her. The headline read, "Billionaire Alexander Harrington hospitalized after near-fatal heart attack at Manhattan restaurant saved by Waitress." The article included a photo of the Sterling room's exterior, another of Alexander from some charity gala, and a quote from Bernard describing Maya's quick thinking and professional response. They'd spelled her name wrong, Mayo Reeves, but there she was, immortalized in the New York Post as the woman who'd saved Alexander Harrington's life. "Oh, God," Maya breathed, scrolling through the article. It mentioned her incomplete EMT training, her mother's illness, the medical debt. Someone had dug into her life and laid it bare for public consumption, turning her private struggles into human interest details to flavor the story of a wealthy man's brush with mortality. "It's not all bad," Marcus said gently, reading her expression. "Look at the comments." Against her better judgment, Maya looked. Among the expected mix of snark and speculation, there were hundreds of comments praising her quick action, calling her a hero, expressing gratitude that someone had known what to do. Several had shared their own stories of heart attacks and near misses. A few had even started a GoFundMe for her medical debt. It had already raised $3,000 from strangers. "I didn't ask for this," Maya said, feeling something like panic rising in her chest. She'd spent years being invisible, and now suddenly the entire city was reading about her life, her failures, her compromises. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Marcus corrected, taking his phone back. "You did what someone trained would do. There's a difference, and now everyone knows it." He paused, studying her face. "Alexander Harrington has been trying to reach you, hasn't he?" "He texted last night. I haven't responded." "Why not?" "Because I don't know what to say. Thank you for texting? I'm glad you're not dead? What do you even talk about with someone like that? Marcus laughed, the sound echoing in the wine cellar. Someone like that is just someone, Maya. A person. He nearly died and you held his hand while the paramedics came. That's not nothing. That creates a connection whether you want it to or not. Maya knew he was right, but the knowledge didn't make it any easier. She learned long ago that connections could be dangerous, that letting people in meant giving them the power to hurt you when they inevitably left. Better to stay on the periphery, to serve and smile and remain fundamentally separate. But that wasn't entirely true, was it? She'd connected with Marcus, with Elena, with some of the regulars who actually bothered to learn her name. She'd learned that loneliness was its own kind of danger, that walls built up high enough eventually became a prison. Staff meal was Chef Laurent's bouillabaisse, rich with saffron and the fresh catch from the morning market. The staff gathered around the long table in the back room, a moment of communal eating before the performance of service began. Everyone wanted to talk about last night, about Alexander Harrington, about the article. Maya answered questions with patient brevity, deflecting the attention as much as she could, until Bernard cleared his throat for attention.
"As you all know by now, we had an unusual situation last night," he said, his French accent making even emergencies sound elegant. "Maya handled it with extraordinary professionalism and skill. I have spoken with Mr. Harrington's assistant this morning, and he wanted me to convey his deep gratitude to our entire staff, but particularly to Maya." Bernard paused, looking directly at her. He's also made a rather substantial gesture. Maya felt her stomach drop. "What kind of gesture?" "He's covering your mother's medical debt," Bernard said quietly. "All of it. The payment was processed this morning. He wanted you to know that there are no strings attached, no expectations, just gratitude." The room went absolutely silent. Maya couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. $80,000. Gone, just like that. The weight she'd been carrying for 3 years, the reason she worked double shifts and skipped meals and deferred her dreams, erased by a single decision from a man she barely knew. "I can't accept that," she heard herself say, though her voice sounded distant, unconnected to her body. That's too much. I didn't do anything special. Anyone with medical training would have. But no one else did. Everyone else in that dining room saw a billionaire having a bad evening. You saw a human being having a heart attack. That matters, Maya. The seeing matters. She thought about that as she prepared for service, as she polished water glasses and folded napkins into perfect swans, and reviewed the evening specials with the kind of careful attention that usually helped quiet her mind. But tonight, her thoughts kept circling back to Alexander Harrington, to his text still unanswered on her phone, to the question of what she owed him now and what he might want in return. The dining room filled with its usual Thursday crowd, investment bankers and tech executives and old money families who'd been coming to the Sterling Room for decades. Table 12 remained empty, conspicuously so, like a memorial to what had happened there. Maya found herself glancing at it throughout the night, remembering the way Alexander's hand had gripped the table edge, the way his eyes had found hers with such desperate trust. Around 9 p.m., her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Another text from Alexander Harrington. "I heard Bernard told you about the payment. I hope it wasn't presumptuous. You gave me my life back. Let me give you your dreams back. Fair trade?" Maya stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response before she could overthink it. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough, but thank you. I don't know what to say." His response came quickly. "Say you'll visit me at the hospital tomorrow. Let me thank you properly. Room 742, Mount Sinai. Visiting hours are 10 to 8. "I work tomorrow night," Maya typed. "Come before your shift, please. I promise I don't bite. Much." Despite everything, Maya smiled. There was something almost boyish in that last message, a glimpse of humor beneath the formal gratitude. "Okay," she wrote. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll be here, not going anywhere for a few days. Maya slipped her phone back into her pocket and returned to her tables. But something had shifted. The weight she'd been carrying for 3 years was gone, and in its absence, she felt lighter and more terrified in equal measure. What did you do when the obstacle that defined your life suddenly disappeared? How did you remember who you were without the struggle that had shaped you?
The rest of her shift passed in a blur of service and small talk and the familiar choreography of fine dining. When she finally made it home past midnight, her mother was still awake, sitting in the same chair at the kitchen table, but this time with tears streaming down her face. "Mama?" Maya rushed to her side, terrified that something was wrong, that the cancer had come back, that the universe was taking back its momentary mercy. "The hospital called," Elena said, her voice breaking. "They said the debt was paid. All of it. Maya, what did you do?" Maya knelt beside her mother's chair and took her hands. "I saved someone's life," she said simply, "and he decided to save mine back." Elena pulled her into a fierce hug, and they stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the dim light of the kitchen while the Johnsons argued in 4B and the garbage trucks rumbled past and the city breathed around them with its relentless, indifferent rhythm. Later, in bed, Maya pulled out her old EMT textbooks from the nightstand and opened them for the first time in years. The pages were still marked with her highlighter, still annotated with her careful notes. She read about cardiac emergencies, about the golden hour, about the difference between saving a life and merely delaying death. She read until her eyes grew heavy, until the words blurred together, until she fell asleep with the book open on her chest and dreamed of ambulances and flashing lights and the particular privilege of showing up when everything was falling apart. When she woke in the morning, sunlight was streaming through her window, and her mother was humming in the kitchen, and for the first time in 3 years, Maya let herself think the words she'd been too afraid to speak aloud. Maybe it's not too late. Maybe I can still become who I meant to be. Mount Sinai Hospital smelled exactly the way Maya remembered, antiseptic and industrial, with an underlying note of human suffering that no amount of cleaning could erase. She'd spent so many hours in hospitals during her mother's treatment that the smell had become almost comforting in its familiarity, a reminder that places existed where people dedicated their lives to fighting death. Room 742 was on the cardiac floor, past the nurse's station, where a young woman with tired eyes looked up from her charts and smiled. "You here to see Mr. Harrington? He's been asking about you all morning. Go on in." Maya knocked gently before entering, suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been when Alexander was actively dying. This felt more exposing somehow, more intimate, this meeting in daylight where they'd both have to figure out who they were to each other now. Alexander was sitting up in bed, looking remarkably better than he had Thursday night. The gray pallor was gone, replaced with color that spoke of successful intervention and proper care. He wore a hospital gown and had various monitors attached to his chest, but his eyes were alert and tracked her movement as she entered with something that looked almost like relief. "Maya," he said, and his voice was stronger than she expected, "you came." "I said I would." She stood awkwardly near the door, unsure of the protocol for visiting a billionaire in the hospital. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, then put back together by very competent people." He gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Please sit. I promise this won't be weird, or I'll try to make it not weird. No guarantees." Maya sat, settling her purse in her lap like a shield. Up close, in natural light, she could see details she'd missed in the restaurant. The fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his reputation indicated. The scar on his left temple that was old and faded. The way his hands, now resting on the white hospital blanket, looked almost vulnerable without the trappings of his usual authority. "The doctors say you saved my life," Alexander said without preamble. "They said if I had waited even 5 more minutes, the damage would have been catastrophic. If I'd tried to drive myself home like I'd planned, I would have died at a red light somewhere in Midtown."
He paused, his gaze steady on hers. So, thank you seems insufficient, but thank you. You already thanked me, Maya said quietly, very generously, too generously. No such thing. Alexander shifted slightly in the bed, wincing. I've spent 25 years building Harlington Capital, making money, accumulating wealth that I'll never be able to spend in 3 lifetimes. And in one moment, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was that someone saw me dying and knew what to do. That someone happened to be you. Someone who couldn't finish their medical training because they were drowning in debt from saving their mother's life. The math seemed pretty straightforward to me.
The math, Maya repeated, tasting the word. She thought about the 800 textile workers in North Carolina, about whether Alexander had done the math on their lives too, had weighed their livelihoods against his profit margins and found them wanting. But this didn't feel like the moment for that conversation, and maybe she didn't have the right to judge him when he'd just given her back her future. I looked you up, Alexander admitted, after Marcus gave me your number. I hope that's not too invasive, but I wanted to know who you were, who saved me. He paused. You were at the top of your EMT class before you had to drop out. Your instructors wrote letters of recommendation that called you exceptional, gifted, born for emergency medicine. And you've been serving ribeye to investment bankers for 3 years because you couldn't afford to finish. Maya felt heat creep up her neck. It's not that simple. Isn't it? Alexander's voice was gentle but insistent. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, Maya. I'm trying to understand. Because I've spent my entire adult life making calculations about value and worth, and the math here doesn't work. Someone with your talent, your training, your instinct, you should be in an ambulance right now saving lives, not memorizing wine lists. And yet here we are, Maya said, an edge creeping into her voice, despite her best efforts to remain professional. Maybe the math works exactly the way it's supposed to. Maybe the world values some lives more than others, some dreams more than others. You get to build capital and make billions, while people like me clean up after you and hope for tips generous enough to keep the lights on. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and true, and Maya immediately regretted them. This man had just paid off her mother's medical debt, had given her back her future, and here she was throwing his privilege in his face. She opened her mouth to apologize, but Alexander spoke first. You're right, he said simply. You're absolutely right. The math is rigged. I've been one of the people rigging it. He looked down at his hands. I've made decisions that benefited shareholders and destroyed communities. I've chosen profit over people because that's what I was trained to do, what I was rewarded for doing. And I've told myself it was just business, just the natural order of things, just the way the world works. He looked back up at her. And then I almost died in a restaurant where my meal cost more than you make in a week. And the person who saved me was someone whose dreams I'd probably have considered acceptable collateral damage if they'd appeared in one of my quarterly reports. Maya hadn't expected this, the raw honesty, the willingness to see himself clearly. Most wealthy people she'd encountered at the Sterling Room wrapped themselves in justifications and carefully maintained ignorance. They didn't look directly at the human cost of their comfort. "So what now?" she asked. "You pay off my debt and feel better about yourself? Absolution through checkbook?" "No," Alexander's voice was firm. "I pay off your debt because you saved my life and because it's the least I can do. But that's not about me feeling better. That's about removing an obstacle that never should have existed in the first place." He leaned forward slightly, intensity burning in his dark eyes. "What comes next is up to you. You can go back to finishing your EMT certification, get back on the path you were meant to be on. Or," he trailed off, "or what? Or you could consider something bigger." Alexander seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking, since they brought me here, about what my life has been, what I've built. Harrington Capital has acquired and dismantled 37 companies in the past decade. We've made billions for our investors. We've also put thousands of people out of work, destroyed communities, prioritized short-term gain over long-term sustainability. I almost died in a restaurant where my meal cost more than you make in a week.
And the person who saved me was someone whose dreams I'd probably have considered acceptable collateral damage if they'd appeared in one of my quarterly reports. Maya felt something shift in her chest, a reluctant sympathy for this man who had everything and somehow nothing. "So change it," she said. "You're not dead. You have time." "I want to. I need to. But I don't know how. I've spent so long calculating value in dollars that I've forgotten how to measure it in any other way. You see the math differently. You know what actually matters. What if—" He stopped, shook his head. "Never mind. It's too much to ask." "What?" Maya prompted, curiosity overriding caution. "What if you helped me figure it out?" The words came out in a rush. "Not as my employee, not as someone I'm hiring. As, I don't know, a consultant, a conscience, someone who can show me how to rebuild what I've broken, how to use the resources I've accumulated for something other than accumulating more resources." Maya stared at him, trying to process what he was asking. "You want me to teach a billionaire how to be a good person?" "I want you to help me remember how to be a person at all. Good would be aspirational." Before Maya could respond, the door opened and a woman in her early 30s entered, carrying a tablet and an expression of polite concern. She was impeccably dressed in a navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in a style that suggested both professionalism and perpetual readiness for crisis management.
"Mr. Harrington, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss the board meeting tomorrow and—" She stopped abruptly when she saw Maya, her eyes widening in recognition. "Oh, you're the waitress, from the article." Maya felt herself bristling at the dismissive way the woman said waitress, as if it were a kind of insult rather than simply what she did for a living. "Maya Reeves," she said, standing and extending her hand with deliberate politeness. "And you are?" "Jennifer Chen, Mr. Harrington's chief of staff." Jennifer shook Maya's hand with a grip that was professional but cool. "I wanted to thank you personally for your quick action Thursday night. We're all very grateful." The "we" suggested a collective that Maya wasn't part of, a world of executives and assistants and people who handled logistics rather than lived them. "Just doing what needed to be done," Maya said. "Jennifer," Alexander interjected, his voice carrying the kind of casual authority that came from years of being obeyed. "Can we reschedule the board discussion? I'm in the middle of something important here." Jennifer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sir, the board is concerned about your health and your ability to continue leading the company. They need reassurance, a plan for succession if needed, discussion of how this incident affects our pending acquisitions." "Tell them I'm fine," Alexander said flatly. "Tell them I'll attend the meeting via video conference. Tell them whatever they need to hear. But right now, I'm having a conversation that actually matters." The words clearly stung Jennifer, though she hid it well behind professional composure. "Of course," she said stiffly. "I'll handle it. But we do need to talk about the hospital bills, the press requests, the—" "Later," Alexander said, not unkindly but with finality. "Please, Jennifer, give me an hour." Jennifer nodded and left, but not before shooting Maya a look that was difficult to interpret, part curiosity, part assessment, part warning. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt emphatic. "I'm sorry about that. Jennifer's brilliant, but she's been trained to think everything is a crisis that needs immediate management." "Is it? A crisis, I mean, your board being concerned about you?" Alexander waved a hand dismissively. "The board is always concerned about something. That's what boards do. They're concerned about liability, about stock prices, about whether my heart attack makes the company look unstable. They're not concerned about me. They're concerned about what my death or incapacity would mean for their portfolios." "You sound bitter." "I sound realistic." Alexander adjusted his position in the bed again, grimacing slightly. "I built Harrington Capital from nothing. I made those board members millions, and the second I show weakness, they start planning how to replace me. That's the math of capitalism, Maya. Loyalty only extends as far as profitability." She thought about this as she sat back down, about the coldness of a world where even saving someone's life had to be calculated in terms of value and return on investment. She thought about the 800 textile workers again, about whether they'd had a Jennifer Chen managing their dismissal, making it all sound necessary and inevitable and just good business.
Why did you do it? She asked suddenly. The North Carolina Textile Company. I read about it. 800 jobs gone so you could sell the real estate and machinery for parts. Why? Alexander didn't flinch from the question, though she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not quite shame, but maybe its precursor, the beginning of recognition. Because the company was failing. Because keeping it running would have meant losing money for our investors. Because I'd been taught that my job was to maximize returns, not to worry about the human consequences. Because it was easier to see numbers on a spreadsheet than faces in a factory. Those were people, Maya said quietly. With families, with mortgages and car payments and kids in school. 800 people whose lives you destroyed because the math said you should. I know that now. I knew it then, too, intellectually, but I'd learned to keep that knowledge separate from my decisions. Compartmentalization, that's what they taught us in business school. How to make hard choices without letting empathy interfere with efficiency. He looked it directly. I was good at it, very good, until I wasn't. What changed? I almost died, Alexander said simply. And in those moments when I thought I might, when I couldn't breathe and the pain was everything, I realized that none of it mattered. Not the money, not the acquisitions, not the carefully built empire. The only thing that mattered was that someone saw me as a human being worth saving. He paused. You didn't know who I was when you started helping me, did you? I knew your name from the reservation. I knew you were wealthy, but no, I didn't recognize you specifically. I just saw someone having a heart attack.
Exactly. Alexander's expression was intense now, almost fierce. You saw a person, not a portfolio. And that's what I want to learn how to do. See people instead of numbers, value instead of valuation. I want to figure out how to undo some of the damage I've done, or at least stop doing more damage going forward. Maya wanted to believe him, could see the sincerity in his face, but she'd learned to be cautious about grand declarations. People don't change overnight, she said, especially not people who spent decades perfecting a certain way of being in the world. I know, Alexander agreed, which is why I need help, why I need someone who sees the world differently to show me what I've been missing. He looked at her with something almost like desperation. I'm not asking you to fix me, Maya. I'm asking you to help me fix what I've broken, starting with figuring out what that even means. Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Bernard wants you to come in early today. VIP reservation at 6 p.m. needs full staff. Sorry. Maya showed Alexander the screen. I have to go. My shift starts earlier than planned. Of course, Alexander nodded, but she could see the disappointment in his eyes. Will you think about what I asked? About helping me? I'll think about it, Maya promised, standing. But I need to understand what you're actually asking. Are you talking about consulting? About working for you? Because I have a job, and I'm planning to finish my EMT certification, and I'm not interested in becoming someone's pet project or moral compass for hire. Nothing like that, Alexander said quickly. I'm talking about... Honestly, I don't know exactly what I'm talking about. I just know that meeting you, being saved by you, made me realize how much I've been missing, how much I've been wrong about. And I want to do better. I need to do better. He paused. What if we just started with dinner? A real conversation. Not in a hospital room, not with me hooked up to monitors, just two people trying to figure out if there's something here worth exploring. Dinner, Maya repeated skeptically. You want to take me to dinner. Not at the Sterling Room, Alexander said with a hint of a smile. Somewhere else, somewhere without tablecloths and wine lists and the ghost of my almost death hanging over us, somewhere we can talk like actual humans. Maya felt the pull of it. The temptation to say yes, to step into this strange possibility that had opened up between them. But she also felt the warning bells, the sense that crossing this line would change things in ways she couldn't predict or control. She'd spent 3 years keeping her life contained and manageable, and Alexander Harrington represented the opposite of containment. He was chaos and complexity and the kind of entanglement that could swallow her whole. Let me think about it, she said again, more firmly this time. You almost died, Alexander. You're in a hospital bed, probably on pain medication, definitely traumatized by what happened.
This isn't the time to be making big decisions about changing your life or inviting strangers into it. You're not a stranger, Alexander said. You held my hand while I was dying. You saw me at my most vulnerable and didn't look away. That makes you something other than a stranger. Maya didn't have an answer for that, so she simply nodded and headed for the door. But just before leaving, she turned back. The textile workers, the 800 people you put out of work, what happened to them? Alexander's face shuddered slightly. Some found other jobs. Some didn't. Some retired early on inadequate pensions. Some... He stopped, swallowed hard. Some probably lost their homes, their savings, their sense of identity. I don't know the specifics. I made sure not to know the specifics. Maybe that's where you start, Maya suggested. If you really want to fix what you've broken, find out what actually happened to those people. Look at the faces behind the numbers. She left before he could respond, but she carried his expression with her as she walked out of Mount Sinai and into the cold October afternoon, the look of someone being asked to face something they'd spent years avoiding, the look of reluctant recognition that maybe they owed a debt that money alone couldn't repay. Elena was in the kitchen when Maya got home, cooking adobo and humming the old songs from her childhood in Manila. The smell wrapped around Maya, like comfort, like the reminder that some things remained constant even as everything else shifted. "You went to see him," Elena said without looking up from the stove. "The billionaire. How did you know?" "You have that look, like you're trying to solve a problem that might not have a solution." Elena finally turned, studying her daughter's face with the particular insight of mothers. "What did he want?" "To say thank you. To pay off your medical debt, which he already did." Maya paused, considering how to explain the rest. "And to ask for my help with something I don't fully understand yet." "Help with what?" "Becoming a better person, I think, or figuring out how to undo some of the damage he's done." Maya sat at the kitchen table, suddenly exhausted. "He wants to take me to dinner, to talk about how he can change his life, use his resources differently. He thinks I can show him how." Elena turned off the stove and sat across from her daughter, her expression thoughtful. "What do you think?" "I think he's in crisis mode," Maya said honestly. "I think he almost died and now he wants to believe his life can mean something more than just making money. I think in a few weeks, when he's recovered and back in his office, he'll forget all about this conversation and go back to being exactly who he was before." "Maybe," Elena agreed, "or maybe not. People do change, Anik. Sometimes it takes something terrible to wake them up, but when they wake up, they really wake up." She reached across the table and took Maya's hand. "Your father was like that." Maya felt her chest tighten. They rarely talked about her father, who died when she was 7, a construction accident, a fall from scaffolding, a tragedy that had reshaped their lives completely. "How so?" "He was angry when he was young, angry at the world, at his immigrant parents, at having to work so hard for so little. He made bad choices, hurt people, cared only about himself." She smiled slightly at the memory. "And then you were born. And he looked at you, this tiny, perfect person, and something broke open in him. He decided he wanted to be worthy of you, wanted to be someone you could be proud of." "I barely remember him," Maya whispered. "He remembered you. Every day he went to work, he was thinking about you, about building a better life for us. The anger didn't go away overnight, but he learned to transform it into purpose." She squeezed Maya's hand. "I'm not saying your billionaire is like your father, but I am saying people can change if they have a reason to. Maybe you're his reason." Maya thought about this as she got ready for her shift at the Sterling room, showered, dressed, tied her hair back with practiced efficiency. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe Alexander Harrington could change. But even if he could, was it her responsibility to help him? Didn't she deserve to focus on her own dreams, her own future, rather than becoming someone else's redemption project?
The Sterling room was already busy when she arrived at 5:30, the early dinner crowd filling the tables with their usual mix of celebration and business. Maya slipped into the familiar rhythm of service, took orders and delivered food, and smiled at the appropriate moments. But something felt different tonight, off-kilter in a way she couldn't quite name. Table 12 remained conspicuously empty, still marked off in the reservation system as unavailable. Maya found herself glancing at it throughout the night, remembering Thursday, wondering if Alexander was thinking about it too from his hospital bed. Around 7 p.m., Bernard approached her with an unusual expression, something between concern and excitement. "Maya, there's someone here to see you. Not a diner. She says it's about Mr. Harrington." Maya followed him to the waiting area near the host stand, where Jennifer Chen stood looking crisp and professional despite the late hour. She smiled when she saw Maya, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Reeves, I'm sorry to interrupt your shift. Do you have a moment?" Bernard nodded permission, and Maya stepped aside with Jennifer, wariness prickling along her spine. "What's this about?" "Mr. Harrington," Jennifer said simply. "I'm concerned about him, and I think you might be too if you knew the full situation." "What situation?" Jennifer glanced around, ensuring they weren't being overheard. "He's making decisions that aren't in his best interest, talking about restructuring the company, liquidating assets to fund some kind of charitable foundation, reaching out to the North Carolina textile workers to offer severance packages 3 years too late." She fixed Maya with an intense gaze. "He's talking about all of this because of you, because of something you said to him." "I just asked him what happened to those people. I didn't tell him to liquidate anything." "No, but you planted a seed. And now Alexander is in a vulnerable state, medically and emotionally, and he's making impulsive choices that could destroy everything he's built." Jennifer's voice remained calm, but she could hear the steel underneath. "He's talking about stepping down as CEO, about appointing someone to run the company while he focuses on making amends." Those are his words, making amends. "And that's bad because what?"
Because Harrington Capital employs 300 people directly and supports thousands more through our investments, Jennifer said crisply. "Because if Alexander Harrington has a crisis of conscience and destabilizes the company, those people lose their jobs. Because good intentions don't pay salaries or fund pensions." She paused. "I know you mean well, Ms. Reeves. I know you saved his life, and we're all grateful. But I'm asking you, as someone who actually cares about Alexander beyond whatever guilt or gratitude brought you into his hospital room, to think about what you're encouraging him toward." Maya felt anger rising in her chest, hot and defensive. "I'm not encouraging him toward anything. He asked me to help him figure out how to do better, and I told him to look at the consequences of his actions. If that makes him uncomfortable, maybe he should be uncomfortable. Discomfort is one thing. Financial ruin and destroyed legacy is another. Alexander has done immense good with his wealth. Donations to hospitals, funding for research, scholarships for underprivileged students. If he burns down his company in a fit of crisis-induced remorse, all of that goes away too. Or maybe, Maya countered, he finds a way to do good that doesn't require destroying communities first. Maybe the math works differently when you actually value human lives instead of treating them as acceptable losses." Jennifer's expression hardened. "You've known him for 4 days. I've worked with him for 8 years. I've seen him build something extraordinary, and I've watched him carry the weight of difficult decisions that someone has to make. The world isn't simple, Ms. Reeves, and neither is he. Don't reduce him to a villain in your story just because it makes your role easier to understand." The words hit harder than Maya expected, cutting through her defensiveness to something uncomfortably close to truth. Was she reducing Alexander to a simple narrative? Wealthy man has a crisis, needs poor woman to teach him humanity. Was she casting herself as the moral authority simply because she'd struggled and he hadn't? "What do you want from me?" Maya asked quietly. "I want you to be careful. With him, with his vulnerability, with the power you suddenly have over someone who's questioning everything he thought he knew about himself. I want you to think about the consequences of the advice you give, about who gets hurt if Alexander follows through on whatever redemption arc you're helping him construct. And if I refuse, Maya challenged, if I decide to have dinner with him, to talk to him, to encourage him to actually face what he's done. Jennifer studied her for a long moment. Then I suppose we'll all deal with the fallout. But don't pretend it's purely altruistic what you're doing. Don't pretend there isn't something in this for you too. The validation of being needed by someone powerful. The satisfaction of bringing a billionaire to his knees. The good story you'll get to tell about the waitress who saved a man's life and his soul. Maya wanted to argue, to defend her motivations as pure and simple, but Jennifer's words had found their mark. Because wasn't there something seductive about it, about being seen as important by someone whose importance the world recognizes, about the possibility of wielding influence she'd never had access to before? I should get back to work, Maya said, stepping away. Think about what I said, Jennifer called after her. Please, for his sake and yours. Maya returned to the dining room with Jennifer's warning echoing in her mind, serving her tables with mechanical efficiency while her thoughts churned. She thought about Alexander in his hospital bed, about the desperation in his eyes when he'd asked for her help. She thought about the 800 textile workers and about whether Jennifer's 300 current employees mattered more than those who'd already been sacrificed. She thought about her own motivations, about whether she wanted to help Alexander change or punish him for having what he didn't. Around 9 p.m., her phone buzzed. Another text from Alexander. Jennifer just called me. She said she talked to you. I'm sorry if she overstepped. She means well. She's trying to protect me, protect the company. But I don't need protecting from you, Maya. I need whatever hard truths you're willing to share. Are you sure? Maya typed back. Because hard truths are exactly that, hard, and they might lead you somewhere you don't actually want to go. I'm sure, came his immediate response. Thursday night, I was dying. You were the only person in that room who saw me, really saw me. Whatever comes next, I'd rather face it with my eyes open than spend the rest of my life pretending I don't know what I've been missing. Maya stared at the message, feeling something shift in her chest, a door opening, an invitation extending, a choice presenting itself with all its dangerous possibilities. She could walk away now, could keep her life contained and simple, could finish her EMT training and save other lives without getting entangled in the complicated redemption of Alexander Harrington.
Or she could step forward into the unknown, into this strange partnership with a man she barely knew but had seen at his most vulnerable, and try to figure out together what it meant to build something better from the ruins of what had been. Okay, she typed finally. Dinner, but somewhere real, not fancy, somewhere we can actually talk. Anywhere you want, Alexander responded. Just tell me when and where. Maya thought for a moment, then smiled despite herself. Bella's Pizza in Brooklyn. Saturday night, 7 p.m. Bring cash, they don't take cards, and tipping is mandatory. See you there, came his response, and Maya could almost hear the amusement in his voice. Looking forward to pizza in Brooklyn with mandatory tipping. She put her phone away and returned to her work, but something had changed. The weight she'd been carrying for 3 years was gone, yes, but it had been replaced by something else. Not quite responsibility, not quite hope, but some combination of both. She'd saved Alexander Harrington's life on Thursday night. Now, for better or worse, she was going to try to help him figure out what to do with it. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. When she finally left the Sterling room past midnight, she stood on the street outside the Apex Tower and looked up at the 52nd floor, where everything had changed. The lights were still on up there, the dining room serving its last tables, the chandelier above table 12 no longer flickering. She pulled out her phone and opened her email, finding the message she'd received 3 years ago from the EMT training program. Your provisional acceptance has been extended for up to 5 years. When you're ready to complete your certification, please contact us to resume your coursework. Maya hit reply and began typing. I'm ready to resume my coursework. Please send me information about the next available session. She sent the email before she could second-guess herself, then started walking toward the subway. The October night was cold and clear, and somewhere in the city, Alexander Harrington was lying in a hospital bed thinking about textile workers and second chances. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Elena was probably still awake, drinking jasmine tea and working on her crossword puzzle. Somewhere in the spaces between what had been and what might be, the future was waiting to be written. Maya descended into the subway station, let the train carry her home, and for the first time in 3 years, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the math could work out differently than she'd thought. Maybe saving one life could ripple outward in ways she couldn't predict. Maybe redemption wasn't purchased, but earned through the hard work of facing what you'd been, who you'd hurt, what you still owed. And maybe, just maybe, she could finish becoming the person she'd meant to be while helping someone else figure out who they wanted to become. Saturday arrived with autumn sunshine breaking through Brooklyn's gray skies. Maya stood outside Bella's Pizza, watching Alexander Harrington step out of a cab. No driver, no entourage, just a man in jeans and a sweater who looked almost nervous. "You came," she said. "I promised I would." He smiled, genuine and uncertain. "Where do we start?" Maya thought about the textile workers, about her EMT classes starting next month, about all the ways their worlds had collided and might yet transform each other. "We start with pizza," she said, "and then we figure out the rest." They walked inside together, into the warmth and noise and possibility of what came next. Not a fairy tale, not a simple redemption, just two people trying to do better, one conversation at a time. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything.